Good morning. Today's daf is daf Nun Bet of Masechet Menachot, daf 52. We are at the two dots on the fifth line of 52a. Let me share my screen and we will get started. Um, in the Mishnah that we learned on the top of daf Nun Aleph Amud Bet, we saw the following debate over who pays for the Minchas Chavitin after the Kohen Gadol dies before a new one is appointed. Specifically, again, let's just back up and remember what the Minchas Chavitin is. Every day, the Kohen Gadol would bring a special sacrifice that he himself would have to pay for, and that's called the Minchas Chavitin. And we saw in a prior Mishnah that if they appoint a new, and every day, it would be one isaron of flour, and it would be divided into two parts. He would bring one isaron of flour in the morning, half he would offer in the morning, and half he would offer in the afternoon. And and again, we saw previously that in the prior Mishnah that if in fact they appoint a new Kohen Gadol, that new Kohen Gadol, if a Kohen Gadol passes away or they need to appoint a new one, the second half of the original Kohen Gadol's mincha would not be offered, and instead the new Kohen Gadol would offer a whole isaron again in the afternoon, half of it which would be offered, and the other half would get burned. And so you'd end up with two half isaron offerings and two half burned isaron offerings. The half that the original Kohen Gadol had from the morning that was left over, that would get burned, and the half that was left over from the second Kohen Gadol's afternoon offering, that would also get burned. And so that's the background. But the relevant piece for us right now is that Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda would argue when the Kohen Gadol dies and a new Kohen Gadol has not been appointed, who pays for the afternoon Minchas Chavitin? Rabbi Shimon says that it's paid with public funds. Rabbi Yehuda says the heirs of the Kohen Gadol pay. And as we pick up at the two dots on the fifth line of Nun Bet Amud Aleph, the Gemara quotes a brisa in which Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda have a debate regarding the source of funding for other sacrifices. So that's the relevance of this, because it's not directly related to the Minchas Chavitin, but we will get back to the Minchas Chavitin shortly enough. So Tana Rabbanan, Par Helem Davar Shel Tzibur Usirei Avodas Kochavim Batchila Magvin Lahen Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, when you have a bull for a communal error, that's where the Sanhedrin makes a mistake. So you need to offer that sacrifice for where basically everybody followed the wrong instructions of the Sanhedrin and did a violation of a Torah prohibition that would ordinarily, if they did it on their own, result in them bringing a chatas offering. Now, because they did it at the instruction effectively of the Sanhedrin, the whole community brings a special bull sacrifice. And what Rabbi Yehuda is saying is we do not collect, and take a look at the Rashi. The Rashi is actually on Nun Aleph Amud Bet. It's the last line of Rashi on Nun Aleph Amud Bet. B'tchila magbin lehen kolomar akshav kishemeviin otan goven esamos mikol echad be'echad. Now when they are brought, you collect the money from each individual. Ve'ein bain mitrumas halishka, and we do not take it out of the temple's treasury. Kishar karbonos tzibor, unlike which was what you do for other communal offerings. And so as a result, Rabbi Yehuda says everybody who is involved needs to pay. Rabbi Shimon says no. Mitrumas halishka. Back into the Gemara. Now we're on the end of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th line. Rabbi Shimon Amar, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Mitrumas Alishka Hainbain. They come. It all comes from the temple's treasury, namely the special room where all the money was held. V'hatanya Ivcha, but 1 second, there's another baraisa that reverses the opinions and says that what Rabbi Yehuda said was said by Rabbi Shimon, and what Rabbi Shimon said was said by Rabbi Yehuda. So that seems to be a total contradiction. So Haiminayu Achrita. So they were not going to try and resolve the contradiction. Rather, we're going to say whichever one happened later must be the one that's relevant. Rashi says, Haiminayu, top line of Rashi on Nun Bedamun Aleph, Haiminayu Achariti. Which one of them was said last? Because that's the one we should rely upon. Because maybe the author of the person who was citing the brisa, the presenting the brisa, retracted his original position. And why is it important to understand who says what? Because we have an established rule that we saw in Eruvin, Daf Mem Vav Amud Bet, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, halacha ka Rabbi Yehuda, that when Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon argue, the halacha is going to be like Rabbi Yehuda. So as a result, we need to know who says what. So Amarua Rabbanan Kamei, the Rav Ashi. So the rabbi said in front of Rav Ashi. So Lema Kamaisa Achrita. Let's say that the first one that you cited, namely that Rabbi Yehuda says you collect from the individuals of the congregation anew, and Rabbi Shimon says that you collect from the temple treasury and not make a new collection. That's the one that was said later. And how come we should say that was the one that was said later? The Rabbi Shimon dechayash l'pshia, because we've seen that Rabbi Shimon is concerned about negligence. Now, what does negligence have to do with anything? Well, let's back up a little bit and remind ourselves of something that we saw yesterday. Rabbi Shimon says that in a Mishnah in Shkalim that we saw, I think, yesterday, said basically that there was originally there was a rabbinic decree. Originally the chavitin was required to be paid for from public funds, because that was you were allowed to pay for it from public funds according to the Torah. But the rabbi said, you know what? We should have the heirs of the old Kohen Gadol pay for the chavitin until a new Kohen Gadol was appointed. The problem is that they became negligent, and because people were negligent, we went back and eliminated that rabbinic decree and said, in fact, that you need to pay for it from communal funds, because we didn't want the chavitin not to be brought. And so just as Rabbi Shimon is concerned there about people being negligent and not bringing their sacrifice, the chavitin sacrifice, so too here Rabbi Shimon was concerned that if we put this on the congregation and say that there's got to be a new collection for either the communal error bull or the idolatry-related he-goats, then people would not bring it. So doesn't that show that our first approach was correct? So Rav Ashi responds, no. Amar lohu Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi said to them, Afilu tema basraisa achrita. No, that's not a good proof, because it could be that Rabbi Shimon's concerned about people being negligent, but here he wouldn't be. Because Kicha Chayish Rabbi Shimon Lepshia, when is Rabbi Shimon worried about negligence? B'milsa deleis behu kapara gabava. It's where there's no possibility of receiving atonement. As Rashi says, deleis behu kapara, last line in the wide lines at the top of Rashi on Nun Bet Amud Aleph, and it probably pays to keep your finger on Rashi for a little bit now. Minchas Kohen leisa leyorshim kapara. Unlike the sacrifices for a communal error and for communal idolatry, is no sacrifice. There is no atonement when it comes to the sacrifice of the Minchas Chavitin of the Kohen Gadol. And so as a result, the heirs won't be as concerned about it. And so that's why there he's worried about it, and he says that the community needs to pay for it from communal funds. But and continuing on in Rashi, kapar begava aval parhelem davar kapar letzibor he. But the bull for being negligent, and similarly the he goats for idolatry, those certainly the community gets atonement. So it makes sense to get from the people because everybody wants the atonement. So b'milsa de islahu kapara begava, for those sacrifices where there is atonement, lo chayish Rabbi Shimon l'pshia, so then Rabbi Shimon will not be concerned about negligence. So in the end, we're not clear. Rav Ashi has shown that there's no definitive proof as to whether our brisa, as was originally cited, is correct, or whether the reverse brisa was correct. So my havi Allah. So what did they decide about this? So Amar le Rabba Zuti le Rav Ashi. So Rabba Zuti said to Rav Ashi, Tashma, I'll bring you a proof. Tanya, we have a brisa. Es karbani lachmi ishai reach nichochi tishmeru la'akriv li moado. So this pasuk from Bamidbar Perek Kavches pasuk bet references a number of different ways that you can say korban. As Rashi says, karbani lachmi leishai, second narrow line in Rashi, riba hakasav karbanot harbe. There are many references to sacrifices, to kol hani lashon karban inhu, because each of these are a reference to a korban. As karbani lachmi, right? I'm sorry, as karbani, my offering, that's a korban. Lachmi, my bread. Liishai, lachmi liishai, or my bread for my fires, and reach nichochi. So that's at least three different kinds of language that could refer to sacrifices. And we say about all of them that they have to be offered in their time. So what is this teaching us? L'rabos par helam davar shel tzibor usirei avodas. And the point is that this is reference to the korban tamid. And so as a result, what else should be treated like a tamid, which gets collected from is paid for from funds of the temple's treasury, from the lishkos, and from the lishka. So the Gemara answers, so that coming to include l'rabos paralam davar shel tzibur usirei avodas kochavim shaban mitrumas alishka, that also that the trumas alishka, the temple's treasury, is going to pay also for the communal bowl and the communal error bull and the he goats for idolatry. And so divrei Rabbi Shimon, and that's Rabbi Shimon. So we see basically that Rabbi Shimon says that these two sacrifices, which he has a machlokas with Rabbi Yehuda in another brisa, Rabbi Shimon clearly says that they come from the lishka, trumas halishka. And so as a result, given that they come from that he says the same thing, so our original brisa must be correct. And the irony, of course, is that this brisa, which tells us what Rabbi Shimon says, is not in fact the halacha, because the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda. And so Rabbi Yehuda says, no, we collect anew. We collect from the public at large. And so that is the end of that discussion. And now we go on to the next piece of our Mishnah. So we go back to our Mishnah. Again, our Mishnah talked about the Minchas Chavitin, and the Mishnah noted that the Minchas Chavitin of the Kohen Gadol must be offered whole. And hopefully we covered a little bit of the fact that it's not completely clear who it is that says that. Is that Rabbi Yehuda, or does Rabbi Shimon also agree to that? I think it on some level it's simplest to understand that everybody agrees to that ushlema haisa kriva, that it's that it's brought whole. Now it's also, because it doesn't say when, it's a little unclear as to when we are talking about. When is the is it bring brought whole? Does it mean only in the morning it's brought whole, or is it as we probably interpreted it when we learned the Mishnah yesterday, that it's referring to the afternoon? That even when we bring the replacement chavitin, because the Kohen Gadol has died and his heirs are now bringing it, the heirs are going to bring a new whole one, just as a new Kohen Gadol will bring a whole one, because they can't bring the second half of their relative who passed away. So that's why we would need to bring a new whole one. So that's the way that we probably interpreted it yesterday. But the bottom line is that it isn't completely clear that that's what it's referring to. And so the Gemara asks the question, Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba. So again, Ushlema Haisa Kreva, that's the quote from our Mishnah. And now the Gemara said, V'chulu, and now the Gemara asks, Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, by Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan asked the following question, Shlema Shachris, Ushlema ben Harbaim, is it really referring to the afternoon? And it's saying, just as the morning was brought whole, so too the afternoon is brought whole, meaning a whole Isaron. Again, in the morning, when the original Kohen Gadol, and on a regular day where the Kohen Gadol survives the day, the Kohen Gadol brings the whole in the morning, takes half of it and brings half on the and puts half on the altar in the morning, and takes the other half and brings the other half in the afternoon. But here he passed away in the middle of the day, and so as a result, the question is what happens in the afternoon? Odilma shlema shacharis uvetela ben arbaim. Maybe what it's telling us is that day, the first day of the new Kohen Gadol, the first day of the Kohen Gadol, of the past Kohen Gadol dying, if there's no new Kohen Gadol that's been established, there won't be an afternoon a burning of a Minchas Chavitin at all. And it's only the next day that you would have the Minchas Chavitin if there's no new Kohen Gadol paid for by the heirs or by communal funds. So that's the question that Rabbi Chia bar Abba is asking. So Amarava Tashma, I'll show you which way it is. Doesn't it have to mean that we know for sure that some kind of chavitin is brought in the afternoon also? Because what does the Mishnah say? This is a Mishnah in Tamid, Perek Dalid Mishnah Gimel. And this Mishnah, Rashi tells us that it goes through all of the let's take a look at the Rashi. Shmini bechavitin. The eighth is going to deal with the chavitin. Now, what is that talking about? Take a look at Rashi. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi. Bechavitin b'meseches tamid. This is meseches tamid. Daf lamed aleph amud bet. Money lekohanim yud gimel ha'asukim b'tamid bein baboker bein be'erev. That Mishnah details what the 13 kohanim would do every day, whether in the morning or in the evening. Zebekach, v'zebekach, this one with this, that one with that. So the point is that the eighth kohen would handle the chavitin and putting the chavitin up the ramp onto the altar. And so as a result, what is the implication? Ve'im Isa de Betela ben Harbaim. Now, if you want to tell me that actually the afternoon Isaron, the afternoon chavitin on the day that the Kohen Gadol dies is not going to be offered, Hazimnin delo mishkach le shmini bechavitin. Well, then there will be some times that there won't be a need for the eighth Kohen. And yet we said that there's an eighth Kohen every morning and every evening. So Hechi Dami Demes Kohen Gadol the lo mini achar tachtav. So, but what happens if the Kohen Gadol dies and there's not another one appointed after him? So isn't that an indication that it must be that the heirs would offer the Isaron even in the evening? Because otherwise the answer would have to be that you don't, the question isn't clear. And so that answers our question. So our question was, when we said a hole in the morning and a hole is being brought, Do we mean a hole only in the morning and not in the afternoon, or even in the afternoon? Obviously, we mean even in the afternoon. So as a result, maybe that's what that answers our question. So Amrua Rabbanan Kamei de Rabbi Yirmiyah. So this was said in front of Rabbi Yirmiyah. And Amar Bivlae Tipshai. The Babylonians are foolish. The Mishum de Yasfe de Asru de Chashocha. Amre Shamatza de Mashkachan, the Machshachan, that just as they sit in a dark land, they say things that are dark. They say things that are not clear, that aren't correct. Ella dikatani shvi b'solos tshi b'yayin. After all, it says in that same Mishnah that the seventh Kohen would work with the flour, and the ninth Kohen would work with the wine, and those are that is all part of the special mincha, the libation mincha that goes, the minchas nesachim that goes with the korban tamid. And so again, and now I'm going to show to you that you don't need to have those people. Hachinami de lo batli. Are you going to tell me that these never get nullified? After all, we have a drasha. Mincha sam v'niskehem balayla. Mincha sam v'niskehem afiu lamachar. That the verse that says Mincha in Bamidbar Parakaftet Pasuk Kaf Dalid that says the meal offerings and their libations, we learn from that these Mincha offerings and libations that go with a shlamim or an ola, we can get offered the next, even at night or even the next day. And so as a result, the jobs of Kohanim 7 and 9 in connection with the Tamid are not always going to happen. And so as a result, therefore, your proof is not a good proof. And how can I explain our Mishnah to indicate that even, to explain this Mishnah in Maseches Tamid that says, this, what the Kohanim 7, 8, and 9 do, if it's possible that maybe they won't be needed. Ela de'i lo katani. The point of that Mishnah is to say what regularly happens. We're not going to say Ela de'i, the case of if, meaning if X, Y, and Z, then you wouldn't have these jobs. Lo katani. We're not going to learn every detail. That the point of the Mishnah is to tell us what generally happened. So hachanami de'i lo katani. So too with respect to the eighth Kohen, it's not telling us what happens in every case. And so as a result, there's no proof. And in fact, not only am I going to say that there's no proof, but because there's no proof, I'm going to tell you that in fact you could say that maybe the Minchas Chavitin would be suspended the afternoon that a Kohen Gadol dies if there's no new Kohen that's appointed. So Drua Kamei de Rava. So now Rabbi Yirmiyah's point of insulting the Babylonians now comes back to Rava, who's in Bavel, and Amar, and he says, Mibishusin Amrei Kamayu. It's a shame. I'll add in my own language. It's a shame because only Mibishusin Amrei Kamayu. It's only the mistakes that are said in front of them, even though this was a statement by Rava. Remember, it was Rava who brought this proof. But Rava says, you know what? I realized that was a mistake, what I said. Mitzibusin lo amri kamayu. The good stuff wasn't said in front of them. Back into Rashi. This is now from the bottom of Rashi, 6, 9, 12, 15, about 17 lines up. Mibishusin amri kamayu. Kishanu omrim shum tam she'enu yafeh. When we say something that isn't such a great idea, omrimoto hashomin lifnei b'nei Eretz Yisrael, then the people who hear it go and tell on us essentially to the people of Israel. And so as a result, they only think that we make mistakes. Mitivusin, next Rashi, ki amrina mili ma'al yasa, when we say something really good and that the halacha should follow, lo amri lahu kamayu. They don't end up telling it in front of them. And what should they have said? V'hadar amar Rava. And so then Rava went back and said, Hani nami tivusin he. You know what? I have my halacha was a good halacha. The halacha is that if in fact the Kohen Gadol dies, that when we say in the Mishnah a holy saron is being brought, it means that that afternoon, even though a new Kohen Gadol has not been appointed, the either the heirs or the money from the communal funds, depending on whether you're following Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Shimon, would all get used to buy a new Isaron and to bring a new Isaron, and half of that would be brought on the altar as the second half of the Minchas Chavitin. So, and how do I know that that's true? Because Amar Kra, the Torah says, Solos mincha tamid. The Torah says, this is Vayikra Perek Vav, Pasuk Yud Gimel, that the flour of the fine flour as a mincha should be offered continually. That, what does that do? Harei hilucha kaminchas tamidim. That it's teaching us that a mincha, that just like the mincha of the tamid, right? Because this verse is said in connection with the minchas chavitin, so it's telling us just like the mincha of a tamid is brought afternoon and morning and afternoon, so too the minchas chavitin is brought morning and afternoon, even in the case where a Kohen Gadol has died. And so as a result, a new whole Isaron will be offered. And so as a result, the whole Isaron referred to in the Mishnah is even in the afternoon. So my Haviyallah, so which one is correct? We now have Rabbi Yirmiyah's position that it gets canceled that day, and Rava's position that it gets offered even in the afternoon, and a new whole one is made. So Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Tashma, Titanya, Shlema, Shacharis, Ushlema ben Harbayim. So we actually have a brisa that is explicitly like Rava. You bring a whole Isaron in the morning for the Minchas Chavitin, and if the Kohen Gadol died, well then you'll bring a whole Isaron in the afternoon and not just bring the other half, just like Rava said. Okay.
So what happens if he brings the whole in the morning and the Kohen Gadol does not die? Then does he bring
Then he
another
brings the
whole in the
other half. Then
afternoon?
it's clear. Everybody agrees. Then that was what we learned 2 days ago, I think. That for sure he brings the other half in the afternoon.
No, I'm
100%.
saying, but we just said now that he brings a whole in the morning and then the
Yes.
afternoon if there's an but why would he then bring a half in the afternoon? Are
He
we
brings the remainder of the half. He brings the second half of what he brought in the morning.
but
Meaning
in the
it's
morning he brought a whole, we just said.
yes, no,
But
he brought a hole into the Beis Hamikdash.
right,
Half of it gets put on the altar. That
right.
everybody agrees to. And that's what happens in the morning. The
Okay.
other half then gets put on the altar in the afternoon if
Oh,
the Kohen Gadol survives the day. The question is what happens if the Kohen Gadol does not survive the
right.
day. Everybody agrees that half of what he originally brought is brought in the morning, half is brought in the afternoon, half of the Isaron is brought in the morning, half in the Isaron brought in the afternoon. That everybody agrees to if the Kohen Gadol is surviving.
Right.
Okay,
Okay. So, but in the morning, if not, you bring the whole, but he only puts half on the Mizbeach, right? In the
exactly.
afternoon, if the Kohen Gadol has died, they have to
Then
bring a
you need
new
to bring a
one.
new Isaron, whoever it is, either the new Kohen Gadol or
Right.
the heirs
But he
slash
only
the
puts half on the
community,
Mizbeach.
and only half will end up getting put on the
So
Mizbeach.
what
That's
happens to the
exactly right.
other two halves that are
The other
remaining?
two halves get burned
Okay.
outside the base of Mikdash.
Okay. Okay.
Yep. Great questions. Great questions. Okay, so Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Pligi ba Abba Yossi ben Dostai v'Rabbanan. So the Gemara notes that there's a debate regarding the amount of lavona that was brought with the Minchas Chavitin. So remember, we had the in general, a mincha is going to come with lavona and with oil. Now, the minchas chavitin, the Torah doesn't tell us how much lavona and how much oil is going to be brought. But we have some general rules that we're going to use to apply to it. And it should be, by the way, if we take a look at the Bach, on the Daf, Hagos Bach, it should be instead of Abba Yossi, which is what our Gemara says, he says that it should be Abba Yosef. But all right, in any event, Abba Yosef and the rabbis argue. Abba Yosef ben Dostai Omer, Abba Yosef says, Mafrish la shnei kamatzim shalavoni. You know what? In the morning, the Kohen Gadol is going to separate two kamatzim of lavona. Komatz shachris, the komatz ben arbaim. Remember, he's going to have half an isaron in the morning and half an isaron in the afternoon, and we're going to assume that the Kohen Gadol is going to survive at the moment. That's that's what they're arguing about, a case where the Kohen Gadol survives, and so lives through the day, and so the komatz is so we have one komatz of lavona with the half an isaron in the morning, and one kometz of lavona with a half an isaron in the afternoon. The Rabbanan Amrei and the rabbis say, Mafresh la kometz echat. No, you take one kometz for the whole isaron. Chatzi kometz shachris v'chatzi kometz ben arbaim. Half of it is used in the morning, and half of it is used in the afternoon. Meaning, so b'mai kamiflagi. What is it that they're really arguing about? Abba Yosef ben Dostai Savar. Abba Yosef says, Lo ashkechan chatzi kometz dekariv. We never see in any other offering that the burned part of the offering is half of a kometz of lavona. And so as a result, given the fact that we never see that elsewhere, as a result, he's going to say that when we burn the half isaron in the morning, it's going to get burned with the whole kometz of lavona. And the rabbis say, no, don't focus on the moment of burning. Focus on the moment of taking. Lo ashrechan isaron devoy shnei kimatzim. There's never a one isaron, that's the volume of flour. There's never a one isaron volume of flour that involves two kamatzim of lavona. That just doesn't happen anywhere. So as a result, focus on the one isaron that was taken originally. And when you take one isaron, you take one kometz of lavona. And so as a result, you're just going to split that kometz between the morning and the afternoon. So there's a logic that both the rabbis and Abba Yosef agree to, and that is figure out what else happens in other situations and follow that. They just follow different parts of the service. Abba Yosef follows the burning moment, and therefore you need to take two kamatzim in the so that you have a full kometz to burn in the morning and in the afternoon. And the rabbis say, no, you focus on the taking moment, and you need to have one kometz that you take at the same time that you take one isaron. So by Rabbi Yochanan. So now Rabbi Yochanan asked the following question. So he's going to ask two questions. The first question is only going to be according to the rabbis. Kohen Gadol Shemes, V'lo mina acher taktab. So a Kohen Gadol died, and they have not appointed another one in his place. So now, turning to Nunbet Amudbet, L'Rabbanan Huchbalu Levanosa. According to the rabbis, do they double the Levona? Meaning, do you have to bring another full kometz? Olo. Or not? Or do you not need to bring another full kometz? After all, remember there's the half of the kometz that's left over from the morning. And while you're bringing a new isaron, as we saw, according to Rava, and that's how we concluded, you're going to bring a new isaron in the afternoon. Does that new isaron need a new levona, or can you use the other half from before? So, mi amrina mitosha huchbalu salto huchbalu levanaso. Do we say that just as you come back with a second isaron, and so now you're doubling the amount of flour for the day that has been brought into the Beis Hamikdash for a minchas chavitin, so too we'll double the amount of levona, and now you have to bring a new kometz of levona. O Dilma, my gully gully. Or do we say no? What the Torah told us needed to be doubled gets doubled. As we saw a couple of days ago, we saw that in fact there was that there was a Torah basis for the need to bring a second full isaron if the Kohen Gadol died, either based on the language of otah, according to Rabbi Yehuda, or Khalil Tiktar, according to Rabbi Shimon. So my delog and my delog. Oh, okay. Odilma, umay de milma, odilma, my de gully gully, my de low gully. And when it came to Lavona, the Torah never uses a verb that says anything about it. And of course, again, the Torah never tells us how much Lavona to bring for the Minchas Chavitin. And so as a result, we're going to just use the what we have left over. So that's question number one. Question number two, the shemen. And when it comes to the oil, that you're supposed to bring 3 lug of oil, Bein Abba Yosef ben Dostai, Abba Yosef ben Dostai, Ubein Rabbanan Mahu. What do you do about that? Again, we don't have any statements of Abba Yosef and the rabbis in connection with that, even when the Kohen Gadol survives the day. And so it seems like, according to everybody, you would bring, if the Kohen Gadol were to survive the day, you would bring 3 lug for the Isaron, and you'd split, and you'd burn half of it, 1.5 in the morning, lug in the morning, and 1.5 in the afternoon. And again, the reason that, by the way, the question is only according to the rabbis. Take a look at the top Rashi on Nunbet Amabet. L'Rabbanan Hukbalu Levanosa Shiyavi Kometz Shachris v'Kometz Be'erev. That maybe we would bring 1 full kometz in the morning and 1 full new kometz in the evening, because you can't use the other half of the original. De Bishlam Abba Yosef, that according to Abba Yosef, lo mi boy lay. There's no question there. Delo hochbal. Everybody would agree that you don't need to double it. Shiyavi sheni shnei kamatzim l'kol haktar, because after all, in the morning, 2 kamatzim were brought. Delo matzinu beis kamatzim ba'aktara achat. After all, you'd never find 2 kamatzim being burned at one time, and here you would end up with 1 kometz being burned on the altar, 1 kometz being burned outside the Beis Hamikdash. That's 2 kamatzim being burned at one time. That we never find that, and so as a result, that's even according to Abba Yosef, you would certainly use the remaining full kometz in the afternoon, and you wouldn't need to bring anything new. But according to him, when it comes to the oil, it's not clear what we would need to do. So Amar Rava Tashma Chamishid Kamatzahen. You know what? I'll bring you a proof. There is and so let's take a look at Rashi. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down. Chamisha Hey Kamatzahen. There are 5 kinds of kamatzim. Beperaka Omer Hareani Alai Isaron. That in the later chapter on Daf Kovam Amabet, Chashiv, it calculated the high kometz levona shel chavitin lo chashiv, and the kometz of chavitin wasn't counted. Hasam mishum delichatzayin karav, because according to the rabbis, it was brought half in the morning, half in the afternoon, and that Mishnah gives 5 different cases of when a kometz is needed. A full kometz of levona is needed. 2 are needed in connection with the spoons that go with the showbread. 1 is in connection, and the point is that, and then it goes on and gives 3 others, and the bottom line is, I can't remember all of them off the top of my head at the moment, and the point is that these kamatzin that are associated with the Kohen Gadol's chavitin are not mentioned. And if in fact it would be appropriate to mention it, if in fact a Kohen Gadol would die and you end up bringing a new kometz, and it all gets burned at the same time, half inside the Beis Hamikdash, half outside the Beis Hamikdash, so then it should be mentioned in that Mishnah. Ubishlema kamairi v'lo chatzayin. So if we understand that it's good if you say that it's like the rabbis and you say that you just bring the other half, then everything works. But back into the Gemara, and we'll hold your hand on the place in Rashi as well. And so now we go back into the Gemara one, two, three, 5 lines down, Ve'im Isa, Zimnin, de Mishkachas. And if we find situations where you bring half in the morning, bring one full in the morning and one full in the afternoon, there will be Zion. There should be 7 because there's one for the morning, one for the afternoon, just like you have one for one spoon in connection with the showbread and another for the other one for the showbread. Back into Rashi, V'im Isa, the Kimes Kohen Gadol, if there was a situation when the Kohen Gadol died, Karvu Shalom B'Kol Haktarot, that you bring a full komets at both times that things get burned, both in the morning and in the afternoon. Zimnin de mishkachas shiva. There would be times where you would find 7 kagon beis kamatzim shel chavitin, like the 2 cases of the komets of the chavitin. Daha hasam kachashiv beis kamatzim shel bezichi lechem hapanim. Because after all, in that same Mishnah, it counted as 2 the situation where you had the 2 spoons, each with 1 komets. Afal gavtechad karbaninu, and that's true even though it was all part of one sacrifice. V'hachinami lichsho, and so too here it should be included in the calculation. And so as a result, de'i lo katani. And so the Gemara answers no. Just as we saw before, the rare case, the case of if this happens, we don't teach that case. And so that's why it's not mentioned. Maybe that's the answer, and so as a result, that's why it's not mentioned. So Yosef Rav Papa ka'amar lala hashmaita. So Rav Papa was teaching this teaching. Amar le Rav Yosef bar Shemaya le Rav Papa, and Rav Yosef bar Shemaya says back. But 1 second, that Mishnah, one of the other cases, is talking about a situation where where somebody took the komets and took a komets of flour from a mincha and unlawfully brought it outside the Beis Hamikdash and burned it there as a sacrifice outside the Beis Hamikdash. That you're only going to be liable if you offer a full komets. And so that's an example of where there needs to be a komets. And yet, that's an if case. That is not an ideal situation. And not a common situation. It's a very rare situation. So you can't tell me that the if cases aren't mentioned in that Mishnah. So as a result, we have no definitive proof from that Mishnah. So my Havela. So what did they decide about this? So Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Tashma, the Tanya will. So bring a brisa to show. Kohen Gadol shemeis v'lo minu acher taktav. If a Kohen Gadol dies and another one is not appointed, shlema shachos v'shema shel ben arbaim. You bring a holy saron in the morning and a holy saron in the afternoon. Again, this was the brisa that we cited a few moments ago, proving that the whole mentioned in our Mishnah is referring to a holy saron in the afternoon. Umafrish la shnei kamatzim, and you separate 2 kamatzim of levona. Komets shachris v'komets ben arbaim, and you do 1 for the morning and 1 for the afternoon. Umafrish shloshes lugin, and you take 3 lug of oil. Log mechza v'shachris, log mechza ben arbaim. 1.5 in the morning, 1.5 in the afternoon. Now, Mani, who is this? Ilema Rabbanan, if you tell me that this is the rabbis, then I've got a real problem, because my shalom dehupkalu umayshna shamna delohupkalu. Well, the rabbis say ordinarily you take 1 komets, and so here you're taking 2, so you're doubling it. Well, that part works great, but why would you only double the levona and not double the oil? So Ella Abba Yosef ben Dostai. So it must be Abba Yosef. The Amar Chaviti Kohen Gadol Ba'alma Shnei Kamatzim Baya. He generally says that you require 2 kamatzim, and so what he's telling us is ulavona lo hochbalo, the shemen lo hochbalo. So he's telling us that just like the lavona doesn't get doubled, the oil doesn't get doubled. Umi de shemen la Abba Yosef ben Dostai lo hochbalo, lavana sash v'shamna la Rabbanami lo hochbalo. And so just as Rabbi Abba Yosef says that the oil doesn't get doubled, so too the rabbis would agree that not only does the oil not get doubled, but even the lavona doesn't get doubled, and you would bring only 1 in the morning, and now everything works nicely. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan halacha ka'Abba Yosef ben Dostai, and Rabbi Yochanan, interestingly enough, says that the halacha is like Rabbi Yosef ben Dostai. Now that is not in fact how the Rambam paskins. The Rambam still paskins following following the rabbis, not Rabbi Yosef, but that's what the Gemara says. Umi Amar Rabbi Yochanan Haki. But 1 second, did Rabbi Yochanan really say this? V'ha'amar Rabbi Yochanan halacha kastam Mishnah. He generally says that the halacha is like a stam Mishnah. Utnan, and we have a Mishnah chamisha kamatzin, that there are 5 kamatzim, and we just saw that that Mishnah clearly must hold that, like the rabbis, that the lavona of the chavitin is brought half in the morning and half a kometz in the morning and half a kometz in the afternoon. Because if in fact this Mishnah were following Abba Yosef, there should be 7 kamatzim. So Amorai Nino Vali B'd Rabbi Yochanan. You know what? You're absolutely right. There's a machlokas Amoraim as to what Rabbi Yochanan said. One Amora says that in fact he says that there that halacha is like Abba Yosef ben Dostai, and the other Amora says, you know what, the halacha is like a stam Mishnah, and therefore it's like the Mishnah that says there are 5 kamatzim, and that's a debate within Amoraim according to Rabbi Yochanan. Again, we end up paskening like the Mishnah that says later that there are 5 kamatzim, like the rabbis here, that in fact the kometz, 1 kometz is brought in the morning, and it is split between the at morning and afternoon. And not only is it split between the morning and the afternoon, but even if the Kohen Gadol were to die, there would not be any new lavona that would need to be brought, just as there would not be need for any new oil to be brought. The only thing that we end up bringing is the new flour, and that's because the Torah specifically told us to bring new flour in the case where a Kohen Gadol has died. Okay, so that brings us to Hadron Allah, Hadron Allah. So we now finish the 4th chapter, and we continue with the 5th chapter of Menachot. We'll do the Mishnah, and then
how do we just get the again? Can you just state the 5 versus the 7?
Sure.
Well, the count of 5 versus the count of 7?
Yes. So in that Mishnah, again, I don't remember all. My apologies that I don't have it right here in front of me. That there are 5 different situations where you require a kometz of a kometz. One is a case where you brought the flour outside of the Beis Hamikdash. In order to violate that prohibition, and be chayiv, you would need, if you did it by accident, you'd be chayiv a korban chatas. If you did it intentionally, you'd be chayiv kares. In order to be obligated, you need to bring a full kometz of flour on that in that
Lavona?
sacrifice. That's I'm pretty sure that one is a case of. Well, it could be a kometz of flour or kometz of lavona. Also, I think I'm not 100% sure whether that's a kometz of lavona or flour. But the other 2 cases are 2 of the other cases are that when you bring the showbread, you take special spoons, each of which has a kometz of lavona in it. And so those 2 spoons are cases 2 and 3. Let me see if it has in the notes here what the other cases are of the. But
I just want, so there are 5 of them. I'll accept that. But where do the other 2 come from that make 7?
So the 2 that would make 7 are that if in fact you bring a full kometz if the Kohen Gadol brings a full kometz in the morning, and a full kometz, and then if he dies, there would be a need for a second Kohen or his heirs to bring a second Kohen Gadol or his heirs to bring a new full kometz in the afternoon, and you didn't just burn half in the morning and half in the afternoon, then there would be essentially 2 kamatzin, 2 additional kamatzin associated with the minchas chavitin, half 1 whole for the morning and 1 whole for the afternoon. And so that would bring 5 plus 2, that's 7.
And those would also be involved in violations if he didn't do that.
Correct. Right? It would be involved in rare circumstances. There would be no violation in that situation. That's a situation where the Kohen Gadol has unfortunately died. So It's not a violation, but it's a rare situation. It's still a DE case. right? It's and if this happens, then this happens. And so, but that Mishnah includes if cases, because rare cases, because it says that we even bring it when it includes the case of where you violate the Torah and you bring the co-mates outside the Beis Hamikdash, which is clearly an if case. It's not an ideal situation, and it's certainly not something that happens regularly. And so, as a result, that Mishnah is including if cases, and so that's the situation. And so that's how you get to seven. That's how you get from 5 to 7. That one would be in the morning and one would be in the afternoon. In the case, according to the rabbis, in the case where the Kohen Gadol dies.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And it's clearly not Abba Yosef, because Abba Yosef says even when the Kohen Gadol doesn't die, you bring one in the morning and one in the afternoon. And so that Mishnah is definitely not like Abba Yosef. So that everybody agrees to, but we could at least say that the Mishnah is like the rabbis in an ordinary year where the Kohen lives through the day, or an ordinary day where the Kohen lives through the day, because he brings half in the morning. He only burns half in the morning, half a kometz in the morning and half a kometz in the afternoon. And so as a result, neither of those are full kamatzim. And so as a result, that's why that Mishnah doesn't mention it. But if in fact the Kohen Gadol were to die and you would still bring it, well, then that would be now, and you would now bring a full in the morning and a full in the afternoon, according to the rabbis, that would be a good argument as to why we should have that Mishnah should have mentioned 7, because there's another situation where you have 2 whole kamatzim that are being brought. And so the fact that it doesn't say that shows that the halacha is that we don't, is like the rabbis, that we follow, again, if we follow a Stam Mishnah, that the halacha is like the rabbis, and that that the Kohen Gadol brings a whole kometz in the morning, and even if, God forbid, he were to die during the daytime, we would still bring the second half of that kometz with the new flour, with half of the isaron of the new flour that is brought by either his heirs, the community, or the new Kohen Gadol, as the case may be.
So the rabbis hold by the number 5 then?
Yes, the rabbis definitely hold of the number 5.
And Yosef ben Dosi, what was it?
Abba Yosef. Abba Yosef ben Dostai.
He holds by 7, right?
He would hold of 7 in that Mishnah.
Okay.
Right. Okay, so kol menachos boos matzah. Every mincha offering comes from matzah. Chutz michametz shebetoda, ushtei alechem, except for the toda offering, which has some matzah. 30 of the loaves are matzah, but 10 of the loaves are leavened, and the shtei alechem that are brought on Shavuos that we've been talking about a little bit over the last chapter, those two are brought shehein boos chametz. Those are brought with chametz. Now Tosfos here points out that 1 second, I thought we just saw that that the lech toda, that the breads of the toda are not called a mincha. And a variety of different answers. Either that the halacha is similar, or, and this is just telling us the halacha, or it's not called it's not called a mincha in the Torah, but the rabbis referred to it as a mincha. There are a number of different ways to answer it, but I at least raise the question. Rabbi Meir Omer, so now how do we create, we're taking all this flour as an initial matter, how do we make it into chametz? So Rabbi Meir says the following: Hasaur bodeh lahen mitochan. You take out a little bit of flour, and you're going to make a sourdough from among the flour that you had, umachamsan, and now you put it back in, and it makes the whole thing chametz. Now the Rashi tells us, Suor bodeh lahen mitocho, mitoch isaron. Toda, from inside the isaron of the flour of the toda, ushtei alechem, or from the 2 loaves, hayamotzi seor, you would take out something that would become the seor, that would become the sourdough, shehu lash min hasolas, which is basically taking a little bit of water with the flour, ma'at, a little bit of the flour, la'akar shem nimdad, after you've measured it all, and you've got the right measure in your measuring container, v'tomno besolos, and then you stick it back in to the flour. And now you would have that original flour that was part of the flour and now is back in. It would make everything chametz from itself. And from there it would make everything else chametz. So that is Rebbe Meir's position. Rebbe Yehuda Omer Avhi Eina Mino Muchar. That's not great. As Rashi says, She'ena Mechmetzes Yafeh. You have such a little bit of sourdough. It's not, and it's new sourdough. It's not existing sourdough. It's not powerful. It's not going to work as well. Lefisha Ein La or Mechometz Yafeh. That doesn't have good sourdough in it to make it all chametz. I'm not a baker, but I understand that you have sourdough that you keep in the keep over time in order for it to be more powerful and more able to cause your dough to rise. And so as a result, what does he say? What does Rabbi Yehuda say? Ella, maybe es hasor. Rather, you bring some really good sourdough. Vinos no latocha mida, and you put it in the measuring vessel. Umimale esamida, and then you fill the measuring vessel, and that way you'll end up you'll take some sourdough. That'll be part of the depending on how you read this, but the easiest way to read it is that will be the beginning of your flour that you're going to use for your mincha, either for the toda bread or the shtei alechem, and then you fill in the rest of the isaron around it. So Amrulo, the rabbi said back to him, Avhi Isa chasera o yisera, but there's a problem with that approach because you're going to end up with too much or too little. So Rashi tells us, Avhi Isa yisera o chasera. 1, 2, 3. This is one from the bottom of the Rashi. It's 7 lines up now. Kagom imas or ava, if the sourdough is thick, umguba b'koshi mayim, and you only use a little bit of water, and so as a result, it's very hard, and it's a very tight. Eino machzik nefach gadol ki'ilu haya kemach. That sourdough is going to have more that sourdough is going to have too little amount of it's going to be smaller than the amount of flour it would hold if it was without the water, meaning the water is going to bind it all up together and it's going to have reduced the volume. The nimsa ha'isara.
It says, but nefach gadol, it's a great volume, a large volume. Eino machzik nefach gadol, cannot support a large volume, right? Isn't that what it's saying?
No. Nefach gadol it's not going to be puffy. Nefach is like a breath. It's not going to have a lot of air in it.
Well, nefach is also volume.
So it's going to have a lesser volume.
Right.
It's going to have a lesser volume than if it was flour, natural flour.
Right, okay? Because eino machzik nefach gadol, it cannot support enough volume, I guess.
No, and therefore it's going to have too little volume.
Right.
Yes, okay, then you're agreeing with me. Okay, the nimsa isaron. So now when you pour the rest of the isaron of flour in, it's going to be yeser. It's going to actually be too much. Because let's say you have one cubic centimeter of flour. You take it out, and you use that 1 cubic centimeter of flour, and now you put water in it, and you raise it, and it's a great sourdough now. But now it's going to be smaller than 1 cubic centimeter. You're going to put it in, and now the amount of dough the amount of flour that is going to be added to this and be leveled at an isaron is going to end up with more than an isaron of flour, and that's going to be a problem. Lefi lo haya seor megubal haya nafcho gadol. If you didn't have the seor, the tight and compact sourdough, you would have it would have taken up more space and me'achshav from what you actually have, and therefore it would be the exact isaron of volume of flour. And now, because part of your flour mixture is too tight, it's going to be a problem. V'im einu megubal yafeh. And if it's not actually tight, shenasan bo mayim harbe, because you gave it too much water, nimsa nafel gadol is going to take up more space. Mishailu hayakemach than it would be if it was flour. V'nimsa isaron chaser. And now, when you add the more of flour into the mixture, you're going to be missing. Shim lo bishvil hamayim lo hayamale, and because of the water is going to end up meaning that it's not full. So we have these two different problems, and so as a result, we will pick up with the Gemara explaining our Mishnah, God
You
willing.
need the right amount. Either there's too much water or there's too much flour.
Correct. You don't know that you're exactly too much water or too much flour. That's exactly right. And so that's why the rabbis don't like Rabbi Yehuda's approach.
So how would
They would
what was his
therefore follow
approach?
Rabbi. They were therefore follow Rabbi Meir's approach.
So what
And
was
say
his Rabbi Yehuda's approach? Just put it in with that.
Rabbi Yehuda's approach was to take some existing sourdough
Uh-huh.
before you've measured everything,
Oh,
and then and put it in and count that sourdough towards the overall isaron measurement. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you first have to measure all the flour. You take some of it out, you make it into sourdough, and you put it back in. And so as a result, you've definitely got the right amount of flour in there because you have a full isaron. But here, when according to Rabbi Yehuda, you might end up with too much if you have too tight too dense a sourdough, and you might end up with too little if you have too loose a sourdough. So that is the problem with Rabbi Yehuda's approach, according to the rabbis. Rabbi Yehuda would say, well, what all I care about is the overall measurement. Maybe what I care about is not the volume of flour, but the overall volume generally. And if the overall volume is an isaron, then I don't care whether some of it is denser and some of it is less dense. And so that could be Rabbi Yehuda's approach.
I mean, you'd
But
have an uneven mixture of dough. Some part would be hard, some part would be soft, some part would be. It's not
Well, that
ideal
this
then.
is this is at the very beginning. This is before. Remember, the point is that the idea is that this is going to be chametz, and so the rest of the process we still have to go through. But the point is how is it going to become chametz? That's the question. Are we using outside sourdough, or are we going to make sourdough from this flour itself?
And
Okay.
he wants to use outside sourdough, Rabbi
That's
Yehuda.
what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Yehuda says use outside sourdough. Rabbi Meir says no, you make the sourdough from the flour itself.
And when if you take outside sourdough, that's where he has the problem, right?
That's where you can end up with too much or too little.
Because you didn't measure it appropriately.
Because well, you can't you would have to have somehow measured, right? You're taking it from a sourdough, and the sourdough is a bigger thing, so you're taking some of it. You can't know how much flour was originally in this little piece of sourdough. So you
So
don't
you,
know exactly how much volume it took. It could be greater than its size and volume, or it could have been less than its size and volume because of the addition of water. Is the water binding it so it's tighter and therefore it's more compact? And
right.
therefore, when you now make the whole thing up to an isaron, you have too much flour, or is it loose and therefore you're taking
Too
up
much
more
water.
space? Exactly because of the
Too
water.
much water.
Exactly.
How are we, just a side question, how are we bringing chametz into the Beit HaMikdash? Don't we
Well,
not generally not bring chametz into the Beit HaMikdash?
in general, but these are the two exceptions.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
All right. Have a wonderful day. Looking forward to continuing our learning tomorrow.